Before we dive into one of the saddest and most haunting unsolved murder mysteries in American history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another chilling true crime story, because tonight we are uncovering the case known as the Boy in the Box, a tragedy that haunted the city of Philadelphia for decades, beginning on a cold February day in 1957 when a man checking his muskrat traps in the quiet, wooded area of Fox Chase stumbled upon something strange, a large cardboard box discarded near the brush, at first thinking it was just trash thrown away by someone, but as curiosity got the better of him, he opened the box and discovered a sight that would haunt him forever. Inside lay the tiny, lifeless body of a young boy, naked and wrapped in a worn, thin blanket, his pale face covered in bruises, his hair appearing freshly and roughly cut, and most chilling of all, his once bright eyes had gone completely lifeless. The man immediately reported his discovery to the authorities, and within hours police swarmed the area, sealing it off and beginning an investigation that would turn into one of the most baffling cases of the 20th century, a case that after more than 60 years still raises more questions than answers, and soon the press began referring to him as America's unknown child, a name that became a symbol of both tragedy and the enduring hope that one day, the truth about who this boy was and what happened to him would finally be revealed. When investigators first examined the boy's body, they estimated him to be between 4 and 6 years old. His frame was small and emaciated, weighing barely 30 pounds, and his skin showed multiple bruises and marks suggesting prolonged abuse. There were both old and fresh injuries, leading detectives to believe this child had suffered repeated mistreatment long before his death. His freshly cut, uneven hair made them suspect someone tried to disguise his identity after death. His fingernails were trimmed clean as if someone wanted to remove any trace of DNA or evidence that could tie them to the crime. And investigators also noted that the boy had been washed before being placed in the box, his body unnervingly clean, which only deepened the mystery. The box itself was traced to a J.C. Penney store and was originally used to package a baby bassinet. Detectives thought this was a solid lead because only a limited number of those boxes were distributed in the region, but after checking records, they discovered hundreds of identical boxes had been sold across Pennsylvania and New Jersey, making it nearly impossible to narrow down the purchaser. Still, police refused to give up, combing through purchase logs, canvassing neighborhoods, and distributing thousands of flyers featuring a reconstructed image of the boy's face in the hope that someone would recognize him, but shockingly, no one ever came forward to claim him. No missing child report matched his description. It was as if this child had never existed in any official record, turning this tragedy into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of the century. This case quickly captured national attention. Newspapers printed the story on front pages across the country, and the people of Philadelphia were horrified and heartbroken, wondering how a young boy could be so brutally abused, killed, and discarded like trash without a single person reporting him missing. Police received hundreds of tips and calls from people who thought they might know the child, but every single lead turned into a dead end. Several families even came forward to view the boy's body in person, hoping or fearing that he might be their missing child, but none matched. Investigators took the boy's fingerprints. They were well developed enough to be recorded despite his young age, but no match appeared in any database. Detectives searched school records, medical records, and even orphanage registries, but there was no trace of him anywhere. It was as if he were a ghost with no past. The FBI was eventually brought in to assist with the investigation, but the case continued to go cold, and as the months passed, more and more theories began to surface. Some believed he might have been the victim of an illegal adoption gone wrong. Others thought he could have been sold or trafficked, while some suspected he belonged to a family that wanted to erase his existence completely. Every theory only deepened the darkness surrounding the case, and for the detectives assigned to it, this became an obsession, a burden they carried for the rest of their lives, because they felt a duty to give this nameless boy back his identity. Yet every trail they followed ended in heartbreak and silence, as though the truth itself was being hidden by time. As weeks turned into months, investigators continued to chase every possible clue. They revisited the crime scene multiple times, looking for any piece of evidence they might have missed. They even drained nearby streams and ponds, hoping to find clothing, a weapon, or anything else that could explain how the boy had ended up in that box, but nothing substantial was ever found. Forensic experts re-examined the body and concluded that the cause of death was likely blunt force trauma to the head, though there were also signs of malnourishment and long-term physical abuse, which meant that the boy's death was not a random act but the culmination of sustained suffering. Police artists created sketches of what the boy might have looked like when alive and distributed them across the country, even sending them to orphanages, hospitals, and schools, but again no one claimed to know him. Some of the most haunting details came from the condition of the blanket he was wrapped in. It was cheap, worn, and patched, indicating that whoever did this might not have been wealthy, which narrowed the search only slightly. But the most disturbing fact was that despite massive media coverage, no grieving parent, relative, or guardian ever came forward, suggesting that whoever had been responsible for this child either wanted him forgotten or was somehow incapable of stepping into the light. Police even preserved the boy's tiny hand and footprints in ink, hoping one day they would match a record somewhere, and for years, his photograph hung on station walls and appeared in newspapers in the desperate hope that someone would finally say, "I know him," but silence was the only answer. Decades passed and the case became a cold file, yet it never truly left the minds of investigators and amateur sleuths alike, and from time to time new leads would emerge, reigniting hope that justice might be possible. One of the most famous leads came from a woman known as M, who came forward in the early 2000s claiming that the boy was the child of her abusive mother. According to her account, the boy's name was Jonathan, he had been purchased by her mother from another family, and he was subjected to years of physical abuse until one night he was beaten so badly that he died. M claimed that her mother then cut the boy's hair, cleaned him, and placed him in the box before dumping him in Fox Chase. This confession sent waves through the investigation and gave the case new momentum. Detectives interviewed M extensively, visited the locations she described, and even attempted to verify her claims through property records and neighbors' testimonies. While parts of her story matched known facts about the case, including the haircut, the bathing, and the general timeline, other details could not be corroborated, and her mental health history made her an unreliable witness in the eyes of many investigators. So once again the case stalled, leaving the public with another layer of mystery and heartbreak. Yet for many, M remains one of the most compelling possible answers to who the boy in the box might have been. Meanwhile, the mystery continued to inspire countless investigators, journalists, and internet sleuths, who over the years tried to connect the boy to missing children cases across the country. Some theorized that he could have been a runaway from a traveling carnival or a transient family. Others suggested that he might have been raised completely off the grid, which would explain the lack of medical and school records. Police also investigated foster homes in the area, including one just a short distance away from where the body was found. This foster home reportedly had a history of child neglect and abuse, and some neighbors claimed that one of the fostered children had gone missing around the time of the boy's death. But despite intense scrutiny, no definitive link could be established between the foster home and the boy, leaving that theory in limbo. Over time, as DNA technology advanced, investigators exhumed the boy's body to collect genetic material, hoping that modern science could solve what old-fashioned police work could not. And decades later, genealogical DNA research finally identified the boy in 2022 as Joseph Augustus Zarelli, a breakthrough that gave him back his name after 65 years. Yet even with this revelation, the biggest question of all remains unsolved. Who killed Joseph, and why? And this question continues to keep the boy in the box case one of the most heartbreaking and enduring mysteries in American history. For the detectives who worked the case back in 1957, the boy in the box became more than just another file in a drawer. It became a ghost that haunted them every single day of their careers. Many officers spoke years later about how they kept a photograph of the boy on their desks, a reminder that somewhere out there was a truth that needed to be uncovered. One veteran detective admitted that he would visit the boy's grave on the anniversary of his discovery, leaving flowers or simply standing silently as if apologizing that justice had not been done. The case became personal for them, an emotional burden that followed them into retirement, because in their minds they had sworn to protect the innocent, and here was the ultimate innocent. A child who never even had the chance to be known by name. Journalists who covered the story were also deeply moved. Some kept following the case for decades, writing updates whenever a new lead emerged, and for the public, the boy in the box became a symbol of the forgotten and voiceless. Communities held candlelight vigils to remind the world that his story mattered, and as the years passed, online communities formed, with amateur sleuths dedicating countless hours to piecing together theories, hoping that the internet might accomplish what police work alone could not. This collective sense of responsibility gave the case a strange kind of immortality, as though society itself had adopted the boy, determined to never let him be completely erased from memory, and that emotional connection would prove crucial when breakthroughs finally arrived decades later. Media coverage played a major role in keeping the case alive. Television specials revisited the crime scene, recreations were filmed to give viewers a sense of the eerie stillness of Fox Chase, and true crime books included entire chapters on the mystery, each time sparking renewed public interest. Some coverage focused on the forensic science being applied to the case, showcasing how technology might finally reveal the boy's name, while other coverage took a more emotional approach, interviewing retired detectives and family members of missing children to explore the human toll of living without answers. Every generation seemed to rediscover the boy in the box, from the black and white newspaper era to the age of podcasts and YouTube channels. His story kept finding new audiences, sparking debates, theories, and countless hours of speculation. This media attention helped ensure that funding and resources for the case were not completely cut off, which is part of the reason the body was exhumed multiple times for forensic examination, and it also gave the case a kind of mythic status, with some calling it Philadelphia's greatest unsolved mystery. The combination of tragedy, innocence, and the eerie sense of anonymity created a narrative that continues to capture imaginations, and when the 2022 announcement came that the boy had been identified through advanced genetic genealogy, the media once again flooded the airwaves with his story, this time using his real name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, giving the boy the dignity of being known at last. The identification of Joseph was a bittersweet moment for many. On one hand, it was a triumph of science and persistence, proof that no case is truly hopeless if investigators are willing to keep fighting for answers, but on the other hand, it reopened the deepest wound of all. The fact that his murder is still unsolved. Press conferences held by the Philadelphia Police Department were emotional, with officials openly stating that this case had become part of the city's soul. Detectives spoke of their relief at finally being able to call the boy by his name, yet they also emphasized that this was not the end of the story, because justice still had to be served. Genealogical research also revealed living relatives of Joseph, some of whom had no idea that their family had been connected to such a tragic case. This raised complicated questions about family history, secrecy, and the stigma surrounding child deaths in the 1950s, and while investigators have publicly named Joseph's biological parents, they have not released enough evidence to accuse anyone of the murder, leaving the public in a state of painful curiosity. Many hope that DNA could still point to a suspect, perhaps a relative or someone in Joseph's circle, while others fear that the truth may never be known, making the boy in the box not just a solved identity case but a continuing homicide investigation, still active after nearly 7 decades, and still capable of breaking hearts. Over the decades, countless theories have been proposed about who killed Joseph and why. One of the most prominent theories centers on the idea that he came from an abusive household where his death was accidental but covered up out of fear of punishment. This would explain the fresh haircut, the bathing, and the effort to place him in a box, as if someone tried to give him a final bit of dignity or to delay identification. Some investigators have speculated that the person responsible may have been a parent, step-parent, or guardian who panicked after Joseph's death, while others argue that the abuse was so severe that his death was inevitable, making this a case of homicide rather than accidental death. Another widely discussed theory points to the nearby foster home, where children were reportedly mistreated in the 1950s. Neighbors claimed to have seen a small boy who matched Joseph's description around the time of the murder, and a psychic even led police to the foster home claiming that the boy's spirit had directed her there. Detectives searched the property thoroughly and even questioned the foster parents, but could never find enough physical evidence to make an arrest. This foster home connection remains one of the most controversial aspects of the case, with some amateur sleuths convinced it is the key to solving the mystery, while others believe it is merely a coincidence that has distracted investigators from other leads. Another major theory emerged from the testimony of M., the woman who claimed her mother had purchased and abused Joseph. Supporters of this theory point out how many of her details matched what police already knew, including the haircut, the bathing, and even the timing of his death. Critics, however, note that some of her story did not align with forensic evidence, and her mental health issues made her a less reliable witness. Still, her account remains one of the most compelling narratives because it provides a possible motive: that Joseph was unwanted and suffered at the hands of a sadistic caregiver. There are also theories that Joseph may have been kidnapped from his biological parents and sold illegally, which would explain why there was no missing child report filed. Some theorists argue that this was part of a larger underground adoption ring operating at the time, while others think he might have been a child born out of wedlock and hidden from public view, either in a private home or institution, until his death made his existence impossible to conceal. And there are those who suggest the possibility that Joseph was born with medical issues or developmental delays, and that his death might have been the result of neglect rather than deliberate murder. But regardless of which theory you believe, one fact remains clear: someone out there knows what happened, and that truth has yet to be fully revealed. Today, the case of the boy in the box has found a new life on the internet, where communities of amateur investigators pore over every detail of the case, comparing theories, sharing photos, and debating timelines. Forums, Reddit threads, and YouTube channels have dedicated entire series to Joseph's story. Some creators have traveled to Foxchase to film on location, walking viewers through the path where the box was discovered, while others analyze police reports line by line to look for overlooked clues. Genealogical DNA experts continue to work on building family trees that might one day point to a suspect, and true crime podcasts frequently revisit the case, often interviewing detectives and experts who have been involved over the years. This crowdsourced effort has kept the case in the public consciousness and even generated new tips for authorities, proving that ordinary citizens can play a role in cold case investigations. It has sparked debates about ethics, whether digging into the private lives of Joseph's relatives helps or harms the pursuit of justice. But what cannot be denied is that this collective obsession has given Joseph a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined when he was first found in that lonely cardboard box, turning his story into not just a mystery but a movement dedicated to truth and remembrance. The Boy in the Box case has left a deep imprint on American culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and even fictionalized accounts that attempt to imagine the boy's life and final moments. Major television programs such as America's Most Wanted and Cold Case Files have dedicated episodes to the mystery, helping new generations discover the case. Filmmakers have recreated the haunting fox chase scene with chilling accuracy, showing the lonely box in the woods and the eerie silence that surrounded it. These portrayals often bring viewers to tears, reminding them that this was not just a case but the story of a real child. Authors have written extensively about the investigation, the suspects, and the detectives who pursued the case for decades, turning Joseph's story into a narrative of perseverance and compassion. Many artists and musicians have also used the case as inspiration, creating paintings, songs, and memorials that reflect the tragedy of an unidentified child abandoned by the world. In Philadelphia, his grave became a place of pilgrimage for true crime enthusiasts and compassionate citizens alike, with visitors leaving toys, flowers, and notes promising that he would never be forgotten. Over time, the grave marker was updated to include his name after the 2022 identification, an emotional moment for the city, as though they were finally able to welcome him home after 65 years. And this cultural impact has ensured that The Boy in the Box is not just a case in a police archive but a part of the collective memory of a nation. Modern technology has been a game-changer in the search for answers. Advancements in forensic science have allowed investigators to extract usable DNA from decades-old remains, something that would have been impossible back in the 1950s. The rise of genetic genealogy, the same technology that helped catch the Golden State Killer, provided the crucial breakthrough that finally gave Joseph back his identity. By comparing his DNA to databases of relatives and building a family tree, genealogists were able to narrow down potential parents and confirm his lineage. This has opened the door for further genetic analysis that could one day connect Joseph's DNA to that of a suspect. In addition, digital archiving of old police records has made it easier for researchers to re-examine case files, spotting patterns or inconsistencies that might have been overlooked. Some private labs and nonprofit organizations have even volunteered their services to assist law enforcement, donating time and resources to push the case forward. And with every passing year, the technology becomes more precise, offering renewed hope that one day, someone will be definitively linked to Joseph's murder. Even artificial intelligence is now being considered as a tool for cold cases, capable of analyzing thousands of tips and leads in seconds to identify new angles of investigation. This fusion of human dedication and technological innovation has breathed new life into a case once thought impossible to solve, proving that science and compassion can work hand in hand to seek justice. As we look to the future, there is still a sense of cautious optimism surrounding the Boy in the Box case. Detectives and genealogists continue to work together to piece together Joseph's final story, determined to identify who harmed him and why. Each new piece of data brings them closer to understanding the tragic circumstances of his short life. Advocates for child abuse victims see this case as a symbol of why society must always fight to protect the vulnerable, and they hope that solving Joseph's murder will not only bring closure but also raise awareness about the silent suffering that many children endure. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and news outlets continue to follow the investigation, keeping public pressure alive so that the case is never allowed to fade into obscurity again. And there are already plans for more documentaries and books that will explore the case in light of Joseph's identification, ensuring that his memory continues to inspire people to demand answers. Even as the years go by, there is a powerful belief that someone, somewhere, still remembers the truth, and that one day, that truth will surface, whether through a confession, a DNA match, or a breakthrough in technology. And when that day comes, it will not just solve a mystery. It will fulfill a promise that has been kept for nearly 70 years. The promise that this boy, who was once nameless and voiceless, would finally receive the justice he has always deserved. For the detectives who first discovered the boy in 1957, the psychological impact was profound. Many of them admitted that this case haunted them throughout their entire careers. Some even kept photos of Joseph in their wallets as a reminder of why they became police officers in the first place. This level of emotional attachment is rare but understandable given the tragic nature of the case. Retired homicide detectives have said that they would wake up at night thinking about the boy and wondering if there was something they missed. The sheer helplessness of staring at the small body of a child with no name, no family coming forward, and no immediate clues was devastating. It became a personal mission rather than just another file on their desk. Even younger officers who later inherited the case described feeling a sense of responsibility to speak for Joseph, as though he had become their own child in spirit. Some described visiting his grave after difficult days as a way to renew their commitment, while others struggled with feelings of failure that they could not bring his killer to justice during their tenure. This kind of emotional burden is often underestimated by the public, but it shows how true crime cases can deeply affect those sworn to solve them, shaping their sense of duty and justice for life. The psychological toll extended beyond law enforcement to the community at large. Residents of Philadelphia and especially those near Fox Chase were shaken by the idea that a child could be murdered and discarded so close to home. Parents held their children tighter, neighbors grew suspicious of each other, and rumors spread like wildfire. For many, this case became a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in society. It planted seeds of fear that never fully went away. Even decades later, older residents still talk about the case as though it happened yesterday, sharing memories of hearing about the discovery on the radio or seeing the newspaper headlines that shocked the city. The boy came to symbolize all lost and abused children, sparking community efforts to strengthen child welfare systems. Schools used his story as a grim example to teach students about safety and vigilance. Psychologists argue that this kind of unresolved tragedy creates a collective trauma, a wound that the community carries until closure is achieved. And Joseph's identification in 2022 was like partially closing that wound, bringing both relief and sadness. Relief that he finally had a name and sadness that justice was still out of reach. It reminded everyone that time may pass, but the emotional impact of such cases can last for generations. There is also a fascinating psychological dimension when considering the unknown perpetrator or perpetrators who may still be alive. Criminologists often debate what kind of person could live with the secret of killing a child for so many years. Some argue that if the killing was accidental, the person may have lived with overwhelming guilt, perhaps even visiting the boy's grave in secret. Others suggest that if it was an intentional act of abuse or murder, the killer may have been a psychopath or severely disturbed individual capable of compartmentalizing the crime and going on with life as though nothing happened. Forensic psychologists believe that the act of bathing and grooming Joseph before placing him in the box could indicate a twisted form of remorse or an attempt to erase the crime. These psychological clues might help profile the suspect even decades later. It is possible that if the killer is still alive, they are elderly and may be nearing the point where guilt could drive them to confess. History has shown that some killers make deathbed confessions to unburden their conscience, which is why detectives still hope for that one phone call that could finally reveal the truth. Until then, the question of how a person could commit such an act and remain silent continues to baffle experts and horrify the public. The boy in the box case raises deep ethical questions about how society values justice and the dignity of every human life. Philosophers and criminologists often discuss whether the relentless pursuit of answers after so many decades is an act of justice or simply a refusal to let go. On one hand, continuing to investigate after nearly 70 years shows an extraordinary commitment to ensuring that no victim is forgotten, affirming the principle that even the most vulnerable deserve their story told. On the other hand, it forces us to confront the unsettling reality that justice delayed is justice denied, and that the person responsible may never face legal consequences. There is also the ethical debate about using modern genealogy databases, which involve the DNA of living relatives who may have never consented to being part of a murder investigation. Some argue this is a necessary sacrifice to solve cold cases, while others warn that it sets a precedent for government intrusion into private genetic data. Yet the public response has overwhelmingly supported such measures in this case because the moral imperative to bring closure outweighs the privacy concerns for many. The case has become a philosophical mirror reflecting how we, as a society, balance truth, justice, privacy, and compassion when dealing with tragedy. Identity is another profound theme in the story of Joseph. For 65 years he was America's unknown child, a nameless figure who became a symbol of all missing and murdered children. The moment his name was revealed in 2022 was more than just a forensic breakthrough. It was a moral restoration, a way of returning his humanity. Scholars have written about how naming the dead is a powerful act that gives meaning to their existence and ensures they are remembered not as statistics but as individuals. Joseph's identification turned him from a mystery into a person with a history, a family tree, and a place in the human story. It also made the tragedy more real and painful, because it was no longer just the boy in the box. It was Joseph, someone's son, someone's brother, someone who might have had a future, and this shift in perception has inspired renewed urgency to solve the case, as though giving him back his name was just the first step toward giving him back his justice. This philosophical aspect, the restoration of identity, is part of what makes this case resonate so strongly with people around the world. The case also forces society to examine the nature of justice itself. What does justice look like when so much time has passed, when the likely perpetrator might be dead, and when legal punishment may no longer be possible? Some argue that justice in such cases becomes symbolic, finding the truth, telling the story, and making sure history remembers what happened. Others argue that true justice can only come when the guilty are held accountable in a court of law, which may never happen. This tension between symbolic justice and practical justice is a recurring theme in cold cases. It is why people still search for answers in cases like the Lindbergh kidnapping or the Zodiac murders, even when prosecutions are unlikely, because solving the mystery becomes a way of restoring order to a world that once seemed chaotic and cruel. In this sense, the boy in the box case is as much about our need for meaning as it is about law enforcement. It reflects our collective desire to believe that truth, even after decades of silence, can still prevail, that we can still write a final chapter for Joseph that does not end in question marks, but in a definitive statement. This is who he was, this is what happened, and this is why it matters. Media has played a crucial role in keeping the boy in the box case alive. From the very first newspaper articles in 1957 that published sketches of the boy's face, to television broadcasts that urged the public to come forward with information, this media coverage transformed what could have been a forgotten tragedy into a national mystery. Over time, major true crime shows such as Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted reintroduced the case to new audiences, sparking fresh tips that police occasionally found useful. With the rise of the internet, the case reached global attention, and photos of the box, the boy, and the crime scene became widely available for amateur investigators to analyze. Online forums began dissecting every detail, and some users even traveled to Philadelphia to visit the site in person. This public interest pressured authorities to keep the investigation open, leading to renewed testing of evidence and eventually the successful DNA identification. The symbiosis between media and investigators proved vital, because each time the story resurfaced, it generated new leads, fresh perspectives, and most importantly, it kept Joseph from being forgotten, reminding the world that someone out there still needed to answer for what happened to him. However, the involvement of online communities and true crime enthusiasts is a double-edged sword. While they have helped bring attention to cold cases, they can also spread misinformation or harass people who may be innocent. In the boy in the box case, there have been instances where amateur sleuths accused living relatives of Joseph without sufficient evidence, posting their names and photos online, causing emotional distress to families who had no part in the crime. Law enforcement has sometimes had to step in to clarify rumors and redirect attention to verifiable facts. This highlights the ethical challenge of crowdsourced investigation. It can be a powerful tool for justice, but also a dangerous force if left unchecked. Some psychologists warn that this obsession with solving cold cases can turn tragic events into entertainment, desensitizing audiences to the real pain involved. Yet others argue that this constant public engagement keeps pressure on authorities and ultimately serves the cause of justice. The challenge is finding a balance where public participation aids the case rather than distorts it, and the boy in the box case is often used as a case study for how online detective work can both help and harm an investigation. The internet has also allowed for more sophisticated collaboration between amateur and professional investigators. Platforms like Reddit and specialized true crime forums host discussions where genealogists, criminologists, and former detectives share insights directly with the public. This blending of expertise has led to surprising breakthroughs, sometimes uncovering small but crucial details buried in old reports. The boy in the box case benefited from such collaborations, as tips from online researchers were passed along to Philadelphia police and occasionally verified through official channels. This cooperative model represents a new era in criminal investigation where technology and citizen involvement can coexist productively, but it also means that cases like Joseph's are now living, evolving stories rather than static historical mysteries. People from around the world feel personally connected to the boy, posting tributes, writing letters, and even holding virtual vigils on the anniversary of his discovery. This global community has transformed the case from a local Philadelphia tragedy into an international quest for justice, showing that even decades later, one small boy can unite strangers across continents in the pursuit of truth. One of the most discussed possible scenarios is that Joseph's death was the result of chronic abuse that escalated into a fatal incident. Investigators have long speculated that his emaciated state, the bruises, and the older injuries on his body point to long-term mistreatment, perhaps in a home where neglect and violence were part of his daily life. The fatal injury may have been the result of a beating gone too far, or even an accident like a fall that no one sought medical help for out of fear of being exposed. The decision to bathe and cut his hair before placing him in the box could indicate a desire to make him look presentable, as though the person responsible was conflicted between guilt and self-preservation. Some investigators theorize that the killer may have been a caregiver who truly felt remorse but was terrified of losing their freedom, leading them to place Joseph's body in a box and leave him where they hoped he would be found, giving him where they hoped he would be found, giving him some chance at a proper burial. While others argued this was simply a calculated attempt to distance themselves from the crime and buy time before the body was discovered, the duality of compassion and concealment in this scenario continues to fascinate criminologists. There are also darker and more sensational theories that have captured public imagination, including the possibility that Joseph was the victim of a child trafficking ring or an illegal adoption gone wrong. Some theorists suggest he may have been purchased or taken in exchange for money, then abused and ultimately killed. These theories gained traction in part because there was no missing persons report filed, suggesting that someone deliberately hid his existence. Another fringe theory is that Joseph was part of a secret medical experiment or institutional abuse scandal that authorities covered up to avoid public outrage. Skeptics of this idea argue that it sounds too much like a conspiracy theory, but supporters point to the secrecy surrounding certain state institutions in the 1950s and the history of unethical medical research during that era. Others have speculated that Joseph may have been related to someone powerful, and that his identity was hidden to protect reputations. Though no solid evidence has ever supported this claim, police have publicly stated that while they investigate all tips, they focus only on theories that can be substantiated with physical evidence, as wild speculation can waste precious resources and distract from solvable leads. Law enforcement faces the constant challenge of sifting through thousands of leads to separate credible information from noise. Every time the case is featured in the media, tips flood in. Some are based on genuine memory or suspicion, others are simply hoaxes or fabrications. Detectives have to carefully verify each one, cross-referencing it with existing evidence, checking alibis, and sometimes even exhuming remains for comparison. In the boy in the box case, dozens of potential identities were tested and ruled out before DNA confirmed Joseph's real name. This meticulous process is why the investigation has taken decades, and why police are cautious about announcing breakthroughs too early. False leads can derail public trust and waste limited time. Still, investigators say that even the most outlandish theories can occasionally contain a grain of truth, and so they keep an open mind, following every plausible lead until it is either confirmed or dismissed. This balance between skepticism and curiosity is what keeps cold case detectives engaged, and what gives hope that the right lead, no matter how small, will one day bring justice for Joseph. When Joseph's identity was finally revealed in 2022, it was an emotional earthquake for the surviving members of his biological family. Many of them had lived their entire lives unaware that they were related to one of America's most famous unidentified murder victims. Some expressed heartbreak at learning the truth, struggling to reconcile the child in the photos with the family history they thought they knew. Others reportedly felt a mix of sadness and anger, questioning how and why no one in the family came forward in the 1950s. Investigators have stated that Joseph's parents are no longer alive, which means they will never be able to explain what happened. This leaves the surviving relatives with an impossible emotional burden. They have to grieve a child they never met while also confronting the possibility that someone in their own bloodline may have been responsible for his death. Genealogists who worked on the case have shared how emotional those conversations were as relatives tried to make sense of the past. Many have visited Joseph's grave and brought flowers, trying to give him the love and acknowledgement that he never received in life. This has created a strange but powerful moment of collective healing, as though a family and a city were mourning together after decades of silence. For some relatives, the identification of Joseph raised difficult ethical dilemmas about whether to go public or remain private. Some chose to speak with the media, believing that sharing their story might bring new information to light and keep the case alive. Others requested anonymity, fearful of stigma or unwanted attention that could come with being connected to such a high-profile murder case. This tension is understandable. Not everyone wants their family history scrutinized by strangers on the internet, especially when accusations about possible suspects are still being thrown around. Yet many family members have expressed gratitude that Joseph is no longer just a nameless child, saying that even if justice never comes, at least his identity was restored. Some have said that they hope one day the truth about what happened will be known so that their family can have real closure. Others simply want peace and to move on, which raises the question of whether the continued public obsession with the case is helping the family heal or keeping them trapped in a cycle of pain. This delicate balance is now a part of the ethical debate surrounding the boy in the box case. How to honor Joseph's memory while respecting the privacy of those who share his blood. The revelation of Joseph's name also sparked debates about accountability and forgiveness. If the person responsible is deceased, there can be no trial, no conviction, and no formal sentence. So what does justice look like in this situation? Some argue that uncovering the truth about what happened, even if it implicates someone who can no longer be punished, is still crucial for the sake of history and moral responsibility. Others say that digging too deeply could bring more pain to surviving relatives and reopen wounds that might never fully heal. This dilemma has created emotional conflict for those closest to the case, because closure can sometimes come at the cost of peace. Psychologists working with families of cold case victims often say that naming the killer is not always the end of grief, but the beginning of a new phase of processing. For Joseph's family, the question now is whether to keep pressing for every possible answer, or to let his memory rest now that he finally has a name and a proper headstone. Whatever they choose, the world continues to watch, hoping that their decisions will ultimately lead to truth, compassion, and a sense that justice, in whatever form it can take, has finally been served. As the case moves forward, investigators remain hopeful that genetic genealogy will eventually identify not just Joseph's parents but also extended relatives who could shed light on what happened. Building out detailed family trees could help narrow down who had custody of Joseph at the time of his death, and whether there were siblings, step-parents, or guardians involved who might still be alive. Once a potential suspect is identified, even posthumously, police can conduct further forensic comparisons using archived evidence like hair fibers, fingerprints, or even microscopic particles left in the box. Legal experts note that while a deceased suspect cannot be prosecuted, an official finding naming them as responsible can still be issued, similar to how cold cases have been cleared by exception. When the killer was confirmed but already dead, this would allow authorities to formally close the case and give the public an answer. In addition, if a living suspect is identified, prosecutors could pursue charges even decades after the crime, because murder typically has no statute of limitations in the United States, meaning justice could still be served in a courtroom, which is why detectives emphasize that every new lead is worth pursuing, because the possibility of a trial is still very real. If the case is ever solved definitively, it would represent not just the closing of a file but a historic moment in American criminal investigation. It would be one of the oldest cold cases ever solved, proving that even after 7 decades, the truth can be uncovered with perseverance and science. This outcome would likely lead to documentaries, books, and possibly dramatizations exploring every step of the investigation from 1957 to the present day. It would be a moment of vindication for the generations of detectives who never gave up, and for the citizens who kept Joseph's memory alive. Solving the case would also have a ripple effect on other cold cases, encouraging police departments across the country to revisit their own unsolved child murders with renewed determination. It could also lead to new funding for genealogical research and forensic testing, as public interest would demonstrate that there is value in pursuing these cases no matter how old. Most importantly, it would provide Joseph's family and the public with a sense of narrative completion, turning a haunting question mark into a full stop, affirming that Joseph's short life and tragic death were not in vain because they inspired a movement that led to truth. There are several possible scenarios for how the resolution of this case might play out. One is the identification of a single perpetrator, perhaps a parent or guardian, whose guilt is confirmed through a combination of DNA and corroborating evidence. Another is that multiple people were involved, possibly in a household where everyone shared responsibility for Joseph's abuse and concealment. In that scenario, authorities would have to decide whether to release the names publicly if those individuals are deceased. Some family members might oppose disclosure, while others would demand full transparency for the sake of justice. There is also the possibility that the person responsible will confess voluntarily, perhaps moved by media coverage or their own conscience. Such a confession could be filmed or documented as a final act of truth-telling, giving the world insight into what really happened in those final hours of Joseph's life. Regardless of the path, the moment the case is solved would be a turning point, ending decades of speculation and replacing theory with fact. And whether the solution brings comfort or heartbreak, it would finally give Joseph the justice he has been denied for nearly 70 years. If the boy in the box case is fully solved, its impact on the field of forensic science would be immense. Criminologists and forensic genealogists would point to it as one of the greatest examples of persistence paying off after decades of dead ends. It would validate the power of DNA technology and genetic genealogy as essential tools for law enforcement, potentially leading to more funding for laboratories and more widespread use of these techniques. Universities might begin including this case as a case study in criminal justice programs, teaching students how patient, meticulous work over time can eventually overcome the limitations of an earlier era. Researchers would likely publish papers analyzing the investigative process, identifying what strategies worked, what mistakes delayed progress, and how future cases can be solved faster. It could even influence policy, with legislators advocating for better preservation of evidence and improved sharing of genealogical data between agencies. Ultimately, this case could serve as a template for how to approach the most challenging cold cases in a systematic and scientifically rigorous way, proving that time does not have to be the enemy of justice but can, with the right tools, be conquered. The educational impact of solving the case would also be significant. Public awareness campaigns could use Joseph's story to teach about the importance of reporting child abuse, the value of forensic evidence, and the way technology can help solve even the oldest crimes. Schools could incorporate the case into lessons about empathy, history, and civic duty, encouraging students to think critically about how society protects its most vulnerable members. True crime documentaries could emphasize not just the mystery but the resilience of investigators and the community, inspiring future detectives, genealogists, and scientists to join the fight against injustice. Museums or memorial exhibits could be created to honor Joseph and other unidentified children, turning tragedy into an opportunity for education and prevention. By turning the case into a teaching tool, it could help prevent future cases by reminding the public of their shared responsibility to look out for at-risk children and to speak up when something is wrong. This transformation of a personal tragedy into a public lesson could be one of the most powerful legacies of Joseph's story. Culturally and morally, the resolution of the case would represent a rare moment of collective closure for a story that has spanned multiple generations. It would be a reminder that justice, though slow, can still be achieved if enough people care enough to keep fighting for it. The boy in the box has already become a symbol of society's obligation to give voice to the voiceless, and solving his murder would turn that symbol into a triumph of compassion over cruelty. It would also provide a measure of peace to the city of Philadelphia, which has carried this case as part of its identity for decades. Perhaps annual memorials would shift from mourning to celebration of Joseph's life, marking the day the truth was found, and perhaps his story would inspire other communities to revisit their own unsolved cases, seeking justice for the forgotten. In this way, Joseph's legacy would not just be about what happened to him but about what his case inspired others to do, making him a catalyst for positive change long after his death, ensuring that the box he was found in no longer represents abandonment and sorrow but the beginning of a journey that led to truth, healing, and justice. The Boy in the Box case has become a cornerstone of modern true crime media, influencing countless documentaries, podcasts, and investigative YouTube channels that dissect every detail for audiences hungry for answers. Creators often revisit the case not only because it is haunting but because it offers an ideal narrative structure, a tragic victim, a chilling mystery, a decades-long investigation, and the hope of resolution. This makes it perfect for episodic storytelling where each new development feels like a major revelation. The case also demonstrates how true crime can be a force for good when used responsibly, because its constant presence in the media helped keep pressure on investigators and eventually contributed to Joseph's identification. Yet it also sparks discussion about the ethics of turning tragedy into entertainment. Some critics worry that the commercialization of cases like this risks exploiting the victim's story, but others argue that it is precisely this public attention that keeps cases alive. In the end, the Boy in the Box case has set a template for how media can balance respectful coverage with compelling storytelling, influencing how true crime creators approach similar cold cases today. Psychologists who study true crime audiences say that people are drawn to cases like The Boy in the Box because they offer a safe way to confront some of humanity's darkest realities. Hearing the story of a child victim allows audiences to explore fear, grief, and outrage from the safety of their living room. These cases trigger deep empathy and a desire to see justice done, creating an emotional bond between the viewer and the victim, which is why so many people say they feel personally invested in Joseph's story despite never having known him. There is also a problem-solving element that engages the brain, the clues, the theories, the suspects, all of which give audiences a chance to play detective and imagine themselves solving the case. This psychological engagement explains why online communities spend countless hours debating theories and analyzing crime scene photos. For some people, it is not just entertainment but a mission, a way to feel like they are contributing to justice, even if only indirectly. And The Boy in the Box case, with its twists, its near misses, and its emotional weight, is one of the most powerful examples of how true crime can capture the human imagination. The popularity of this case has also shaped the broader true crime genre, encouraging content creators to focus not just on the gory details of a crime but on the humanity of the victim. Many documentaries now make an effort to highlight who Joseph was and what he might have become if he had lived, shifting the focus from sensationalizing the killer to honoring the life that was lost. This victim-centered approach has become a gold standard in ethical true crime storytelling, emphasizing dignity, respect, and remembrance. The case has also influenced how law enforcement interacts with the media, as police have learned that controlled information releases can engage the public in a way that helps generate useful leads without compromising the integrity of the investigation. This synergy between investigators and storytellers has made true crime not just a form of entertainment but a tool for real-world problem-solving. And as more cold cases are solved with the help of public interest, the Boy in the Box case will continue to be remembered as one of the earliest and most impactful examples of media and law enforcement working together to give a voiceless victim his name and, eventually, justice. For future generations, the Boy in the Box will likely stand as a reminder of how far society has come in protecting children and how much more still needs to be done. His case is not just about one boy but about every child who has suffered abuse in silence, and solving it sends a powerful message that no victim is forgotten. Even if decades pass, educators and parents can use Joseph's story to start conversations about child welfare, teaching children to speak up if they are in danger and teaching adults to recognize signs of abuse before it is too late. This case may inspire reforms in social services, pushing for better tracking of children in vulnerable households and stronger intervention protocols. In this way, Joseph's short life could help save others, turning tragedy into a legacy of protection, and ensuring that future generations inherit not just a story of sorrow but a call to action that leads to fewer cases like his. His name, now known, becomes a symbol not of mystery but of change, motivating a society that refuses to look away from the suffering of its most defenseless members. The case also raises questions about collective responsibility and moral duty, asking how so many people could have missed the signs that Joseph was in trouble and whether neighbors, relatives, or teachers might have intervened had they known what was happening. This uncomfortable reflection forces us to confront our own roles in our communities today, encouraging us not to ignore warning signs when a child is at risk. Sociologists suggest that cases like this can lead to stronger community networks, where people feel empowered to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Religious leaders, activists, and educators can all use Joseph's case as a rallying cry for compassion, reminding society that morality is measured by how we treat the most vulnerable. Every anniversary of his discovery can become an occasion to recommit to protecting children. Much like Amber Alerts and child protection laws were inspired by tragedies, Joseph's story can continue to influence public policy and ethical awareness for years to come, becoming more than just a crime story, becoming a moral lesson for humanity. Ultimately, the Boy in the Box case teaches that the pursuit of justice is not merely a legal process but a moral and cultural one. It shows that society has the capacity to remember, to care, and to act, even when the victim cannot speak for themselves. This transformation of a nameless boy into a named, remembered person is a deeply human act that restores dignity to someone who was denied it in life. It demonstrates that the work of justice is not just about punishment but about recognition, seeing the humanity of the victim and affirming that their life mattered. This is why the case resonates so deeply with so many people across generations and across the world, because it reassures us that even when evil wins a battle, good can still win the war by insisting that the truth be told, and that memory be preserved. In this way, Joseph's story becomes part of the moral fabric of society, inspiring others to seek justice, to demand answers, and to refuse to let tragedy fade into obscurity, making him not just the boy in the box but a symbol of hope, perseverance, and ultimate redemption. As we reach the end of Joseph's story, we must remember that this is not just a story to be listened to and forgotten, but a call to action for everyone who hears it, because every share, every conversation, every moment spent remembering him helps keep his memory alive and ensures that no other child suffers the same fate in silence. You, as the audience, have the power to make sure Joseph's name continues to echo far beyond this video. You can talk about his case with friends, teach your children about compassion, and support organizations that work to prevent child abuse and solve cold cases. Each small action helps turn this tragedy into a force for good, and as long as Joseph's story is told, he will never truly be gone. He will live on as a symbol of persistence and justice, and that is something every viewer can take part in, turning passive interest into active remembrance, and proving that the world can be better because we cared enough to act, because we refused to let him be just a forgotten boy in a box. Looking toward the future, There is hope that Joseph's case will inspire a new generation of detectives, scientists, and ordinary citizens to take up the cause of solving cold cases and protecting children. Perhaps one day there will be no more unidentified victims, because technology and public awareness will have advanced to the point where every case can be solved quickly and every child can be found. Imagine a world where every missing child's name is known, every crime is solved, and every victim is given the dignity they deserve. That vision begins with caring about cases like Joseph's, with refusing to accept that some mysteries must remain mysteries, and with supporting the tools and the people who work tirelessly to bring closure. This is not just a dream but a real possibility if enough people commit to making it happen. Joseph's case proves that even after 70 years, justice is possible. So how much more could we accomplish if we acted sooner, if we invested more, if we refused to wait? That is the future we can create together. So as we close this chapter, we invite you to be part of Joseph's legacy by keeping his story alive. If you found meaning in this journey, please consider subscribing to this channel, leaving a like, and sharing this video so that more people can learn who Joseph was and why his case matters. Every new viewer is another set of eyes and ears that might help solve the remaining unanswered questions, and every subscriber helps keep us motivated to continue telling the stories of the voiceless. We promise to keep bringing you not just mysteries but the truth behind them, because the truth is what Joseph deserved and what every victim deserves. Together, we can honor his memory by turning this tragedy into a force that saves lives. We can ensure that no child is ever forgotten again, and that justice is never left unfinished. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, justice delayed is not justice denied, as long as we refuse to give up. Even after hearing every detail of Joseph's story, many viewers will find themselves sitting in silence, thinking about the small, vulnerable child left alone in a box all those years ago, and in that quiet moment of reflection, something important happens. We begin to imagine what we would have done if we had been there, if we had known Joseph, if we had seen the warning signs. This kind of introspection is powerful because it challenges us to act differently today. It makes us look closer at the children in our own neighborhoods, our own communities, to ensure none of them fall through the cracks. It reminds us that tragedies like Joseph's do not just happen in the past but can still happen in the present if no one is paying attention, and it calls us to be the ones who notice, the ones who speak up, the ones who protect, because one voice, one report, one act of compassion could be the difference between a child being saved or being lost forever. Psychologists often say that stories like this help us process collective grief and transform it into collective responsibility. Joseph's story is heavy, heartbreaking, and unforgettable, but it is also a chance to turn pain into purpose. We cannot go back to 1957 and rescue him, but we can make sure that his suffering was not in vain by preventing others from meeting the same fate. This is how a single case becomes a movement, how one boy who never had the chance to grow up becomes a teacher for millions, showing us that evil thrives in silence and that good must be active and vigilant. Every viewer who chooses to stay engaged, to learn more, to donate to child protection organizations, or simply to remain aware of the children around them is part of Joseph's legacy, and if enough of us choose action, his story will be more than a tragedy. It will be a turning point in how society treats its most defenseless members. As you leave this video, take Joseph with you. Not just as a memory but as a reason to do good. Talk about his case, share what you have learned, and let it inspire you to be a protector in your own world, because justice is not only the job of detectives and prosecutors, it is something we all take part in by refusing to ignore suffering, by supporting truth, and by choosing empathy over apathy. And perhaps that is the greatest gift Joseph gives us today. The chance to be better, to choose to care, to carry his name not as a burden but as a call to live more compassionately, so that no other child ends up nameless, alone, or forgotten, and so that when future generations tell Joseph's story, they will say that his life changed the world, one listener, one viewer, one act of courage at a time. As this story draws to its conclusion, we are left with the image of a small boy whose life was cut tragically short, but whose memory has outlived decades of silence, confusion, and pain. This is not just the story of a victim but the story of a fight for justice that refused to end. Every detective, journalist, genealogist, and ordinary citizen who kept Joseph's case alive became part of a chain that ultimately restored his name and gave him back his humanity. And that chain now includes you, the listener. You are now a keeper of his story, a witness to the truth, and that comes with power, the power to share, to inspire, to act, to make sure this case is never forgotten, and to make sure others like Joseph are found before it is too late. This is the kind of legacy that transforms tragedy into hope, and it is why this case resonates across time, across generations, across hearts that never knew Joseph but feel connected to him all the same, because in the end, We are all responsible for each other, and stories like this remind us that we can choose to be part of the solution, no matter how small that choice may seem. So as we turn off the lights on this case, take a deep breath and let the weight of Joseph's story settle in your heart. Let it stay there not as sorrow but as resolve. Let it remind you every day that no one should be left nameless, no one should be forgotten, and no story should end without justice. If this video moved you, if it made you feel, if it made you think, then do something with that feeling. Subscribe, share, comment, discuss, tell someone about Joseph, because every action you take keeps the flame of his memory burning bright, and with enough light, the darkness that took him will never win. We will keep searching, keep fighting, keep remembering, until every boy in every box, every girl in every unsolved case, every victim left voiceless is finally heard, named, and honored. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of change, and together we can make sure Joseph Augustus Zarelli is never just a mystery again, but forever a symbol of justice found and hope renewed. The conclusion of the boy in the box story is not just about identifying Joseph Augustus Zarelli or learning how he died. It's about the decades-long journey toward justice, the relentless persistence of investigators, and the compassion of an entire community that refused to let this child be forgotten. This case proves that every victim deserves to be named, honored, and given justice, no matter how much time has passed. From the detectives who never gave up, to the forensic scientists who used groundbreaking DNA technology, to the countless citizens who kept Joseph's memory alive, every one of them turned a tragedy into a symbol of hope and determination. Joseph is no longer just America's unknown child. His identity has been restored, his name remembered, and his story transformed into a powerful reminder that we all share responsibility for protecting children, seeking truth, and refusing to let injustice fade into history. By sharing this story, you are helping to ensure that no other child is forgotten, and that the silent victims of the past will continue to have their voices heard until every last case finds its ending. And now, as we close the chapter on Joseph's story, let's carry his name with us, not as a weight of sorrow but as a beacon of hope. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video so more people can learn who Joseph was and why his case matters. Every view, every share, every conversation keeps his memory alive and fuels the fight for justice for other victims like him. This isn't just the end of a mystery, it's the start of change. Together, we can make sure no other child goes nameless, no other story goes untold, and no case is left in the dark forever. Thank you for watching, thank you for remembering Joseph Augustus Zarelli, and most importantly, thank you for refusing to let him be forgotten. As you sit with Joseph's story, let yourself feel the weight of what it means that a little boy, nameless for decades, can finally be called by his real name. This moment is a testament to human perseverance and to the idea that no life is too small, no victim too forgotten, for justice to find them. Imagine how many other cases are still waiting for this kind of breakthrough. How many families are still waiting to know what happened to their loved ones, and consider how this story can motivate all of us to care more, pay attention more, and refuse to let injustice slip by unnoticed. It's easy to scroll past headlines and think these things are far away, but Joseph reminds us that these are not just stories, they are lives, real lives that mattered and still matter, and by remembering them we restore some of what was taken from them. We turn pain into purpose, and tragedy into a rallying cry for a better future. Every time you choose to watch, to listen, to learn, you are becoming part of something bigger than just entertainment. You are participating in a movement of awareness, one that shines light into dark places and demands answers for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And that is what this channel is here to do. To tell the stories of the voiceless, to honor the victims, to press for truth, and to make sure the past does not repeat itself. And that's why we need you with us. Every subscriber strengthens this community, every comment sparks conversation, every share spreads awareness further, making it more likely that someone, somewhere, will come forward with the clue that finally solves another case. That is how justice is built piece by piece, through the effort of many, and tonight, you became part of that effort by staying with us through Joseph's journey. So before you click away, take one last look at Joseph's picture and remember that his story was almost lost to history, but because people cared, because people spoke up, and because people like you keep listening, he is no longer forgotten. He has a name, a place in history, and a voice through all of us. Let this not be the last time you hear about him. Let this be the first step in keeping his memory alive. Subscribe for more stories like this, not just because they are mysteries but because they are opportunities to bring light where there has been darkness, and together we can make sure that no child, no victim, no story ever has to wait 70 years to be heard again. That is the power we hold when we refuse to turn away, when we choose to care, and when we choose to keep telling the stories that matter most. When we look back decades from now, we may see Joseph's story as one of the turning points in how society handles cold cases and child protection, because his case shows that time cannot defeat truth, and that even the smallest, quietest victims can still speak across generations, and perhaps inspire thousands of people to make the world safer for children who are living right now. Think of how many investigators will be motivated to keep working one more day, how many scientists will push for better technology, how many parents will hold their children closer because of what they learned here tonight. This is how one story changes the future. This is how a single tragedy becomes a catalyst for reform. You are now part of that change, because by hearing Joseph's story, by caring about it, by keeping it alive, you have turned what was once just a mystery into a lesson and a mission, proving that even from the darkest places, something good can still grow. So let Joseph's name be a promise. A promise that no other child will be left without a voice, that no other case will be left to gather dust for decades, that as long as we have the tools and the will, we will keep fighting for truth. And as you close this video, remember that your role doesn't end here. You can be part of the movement to spread awareness, to advocate for justice, and to keep Joseph's memory alive. Click subscribe, share his story, talk about what you've learned, and keep the conversation going, because every time you speak his name, you push back against the silence that once surrounded him, and you make it that much harder for history to repeat itself. Thank you for staying, for listening, and for caring. Together, we can make sure that Joseph Augustus Zarelli's story does not end here, but continues to change lives for years to come. Thank you for staying with us through this story and giving Joseph's memory a moment of your time. Please subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that matter, because together, we can make sure no one is ever forgotten again.